Good last Corla, and firstly may I congratulate Minister Harris on his appointment to his new position. I'm myself no stranger to some of the work that he's doing in the department. I wish him well. It's an incredibly important time for many undergraduates and postgraduates in Ireland. Minister, as you're aware, the lives of all citizens have been changed by COVID-19, and today I would like to highlight the case of young people and their ability to access higher education funding under the SUSI system. Many young people have moved home from across the globe and here in Ireland as well due to COVID-19, and they are now ineligible to be classified as independent candidates under SUSI, as they have not been deemed as living independently since the previous October. Does the Minister recognise this dilemma, and has he and his new department brought forward steps to address this particular issue for doctoral funding?
I want to thank Deputy O'Connor for raising this issue and congratulate him on his election to the House. I think he's the youngest deputy in the House. I used to be that, but now I'm the ripe old age of 33. So thank you very much for raising this important question, and indeed you've written to me in relation to it as well. The decision on eligibility for student grant applications is a matter for SUSI, as we both know. For student grant purposes, students are categorised according to their circumstances, either as students dependent on parents or a legal guardian, or as independent mature students. A student may be assessed as an independent student, in other words, without any reference to parental income and address, if they've attained the age of 23 on the 1st of January of the year of first entry to an approved course and is not ordinarily resident with parents from the previous 1st of October. Otherwise, they're assessed as a dependent student. A student's status for grant purposes is defined at their first point of entry to an approved further or higher education course, or at their point of re-entry to an approved course following a break from studies of at least 3 years. Therefore, for students seeking entry to this year's scheme as independent, the 1st of October 2019 would be the relevant date for determining their status. This obviously predates the exceptional circumstances arising from the response to COVID-19 earlier in the current year. So it is that October period that would be relevant. Applicants who do not meet the criteria to be assessed as an independent student for grant purposes, or who cannot supply the necessary documentation to establish independent living for the required period, may still apply to SUSI to have their grant eligibility assessed as a dependent student. The relevant information, including the details of parental income, would be required. Students in third level institutions experiencing exceptional financial need can apply for support under the Student Assistance Fund. This is a fund that assists students in a sensitive and compassionate manner who might otherwise be unable to continue their third level studies due to their financial circumstances, and this can be accessed through the Access Office. We have doubled the funding in this scheme, and it's obviously administered on a confidential basis. But I do get the sense that there's some particular issues that Deputy O'Connor has in relation to the need for kind of common sense to prevail this year, and I'd very much welcome a chance for him to expand on them.
And thank you to the Minister for that response. Look, Minister, you must recognise that the system to qualify as independent candidate under the SUSI system is a very high bar. And having to be living independently since the previous October, and having to be over the age of 23 when first entering higher education, or having a 3-year gap in higher education to qualify as an independent candidate, can be very difficult for many families. And I don't think we can suggest at this point in time that these criteria are solely for the purpose of mean testing in the current economic climate. The Minister, I would ask you that you would recognise that the criteria deters young people from continuing in higher education. And I think COVID-19 has shown us the importance of continuing to support research and development. And I welcome the creation of your current department, and I would hope that you will get the opportunity to address this problem. Minister, I ask you to explain further the rationale for such criteria, and what alternative funding has your department currently have or will be making available to meet the shortfalls that currently exist, as many young people can continue to pursue higher education if the funding is provided that is necessary.
So, I think Deputy O'Connor does make a valid point. I think he's really highlighting through this example, and indeed through other correspondence he sent me, the need to overhaul the entire student support scheme. He asks me to stand over the logic, and of course I can read out long reasons as to how the logic was arrived at and how the legal position, underpinned by this House and statute, is in place. But times change, and lives change, and the way we live our lives change, and the education system changes. And that's why when we negotiated the programme for government, we did very firmly put a commitment to not just review, but to radically overhaul, is actually the phrase in the programme for government, the student support scheme. And this is an area I will look at in the context of that. Obviously, we'll have budget 2021 in the month of October. Whilst we can't do everything in one day, it may provide us with a space to carry out the comprehensive review of this student support scheme over the coming months. What alternative funding is available in the interim is obviously the Student Assistance Fund, which we have doubled to 16 million this year.
Minister, Deputy O'Connor.
Thank you, Minister, for that information. Look, I do appreciate that you're going to be reviewing the Student Support Act. And, I think there's an opportunity here for you to actually look outside the box, perhaps at what other countries are doing with PhD candidates in terms of providing funding for them. I know in the Netherlands, for example, I think is a really interesting and different example to what we have here in Ireland, that PhD candidates are actually treated as employees of their university or their third level institute. And perhaps there's an opportunity for us to look at alternative ways of addressing this problem that could be sustainable going into the future, not just during this pandemic. And I think now is the time for radical action on this. There's an issue, you've said it yourself. I look forward to working with you on this into the future, and I would sincerely hope that you'll take the time in the next number of weeks to address the problems I've outlined to you here today. Gormagat.
Conor, and I'm more than willing to work with him on this, knowing his knowledge and interest and past experience in this area. I want to assure him we will indeed look to best practice in other countries. I do hope the establishment of our new department does provide the opportunity to provide a focus and an energy to these issues that perhaps it's just not humanly possible to have when these issues are part of the Department of Education more broadly. I think the point you make about or imply about precarious employment and the likes is a really valid point, and I think we're beginning to see the impact of that in a number of areas. Particularly, we've been looking at the issue of harassment in recent days, and I've heard from people the issue of precarious employment does often leave people feeling very vulnerable in scenarios. That's not good enough either. So I'll certainly take a look at what you're referring to in relation to how PhD students are dealt with, how they're protected, and how they're given a degree of security and certainty.
Thank you. Next question.